governments have to be able to move fast and quickly and transparently. So I'm rooting for success, but I think he should hang around for a while no matter what. Aisha Roscoe.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask you about the election. Donald Trump is telling his supporters that the election is rigged and asking them to monitor certain areas on election day. How concerned are you about the potential for violence? And what about after election day? Are you worried the results of the election may be distrusted? And for Prime Minister Renzi, the offensive in Mosul has begun. Are you concerned about what happens after liberation? And Mr. President, if you want to weigh in on that as well, I
do.
appreciate it.
Okay. One of the great things about America's democracy is we have a vigorous, sometimes bitter, political contest. And when it's done, historically, regardless of party, the person who loses the election congratulates the winner, reaffirms our democracy, and we move forward. That's how democracy survives, because we recognize that there's something more important than any individual campaign, and that is making sure that the integrity and trust in our institutions sustains itself, because democracy by definition works by consent, not by force. I have never seen in my lifetime or in modern political history any presidential candidate trying to discredit the elections and the election process before votes have even taken place. It's unprecedented. It happens to be based on no facts. Every expert, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, conservative or liberal, who has ever examined these issues in a serious way will tell you that instances of significant voter fraud are not to be found, that, keep in mind, elections are run by state and local officials, which means that there are places like Florida, for example, where you've got a Republican governor who's a Republican appointees are going to be running and monitoring a whole bunch of these election sites. The notion that somehow if Mr. Trump loses Florida, it's because of those people that you have to watch out for, that is both irresponsible and, by the way, doesn't really show the kind of leadership and toughness that you'd want out of a president. You start whining before the game's even over. If whenever things are going badly for you and you lose, you start blaming somebody else, then you don't have what it takes to be in this job. Because there are a lot of times when things don't go our way or my way. That's okay. You fight through it. You work through it. You try to accomplish your goals. But the larger point that I want to emphasize here is that there is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections, in part because they're so decentralized and the numbers of votes involved. There's no evidence that that has happened in the past, or that there are instances in which that will happen this time. And so I invite Mr. Trump to stop whining and go try to make his case to get votes. And if he got the most votes, then it would be my expectation of Hillary Clinton to offer a gracious concession speech and pledge to work with him in order to make sure that the American people benefit from an effective government. And it would be my job to welcome Mr. Trump, regardless of what he said about me or my differences with him on my opinions, and escort him over to the Capitol, in which there would be a peaceful transfer of power. That's what Americans do. That's why America's already great. One way of weakening America and making it less great is if you start betraying those basic American traditions that have been bipartisan and have helped to hold together this democracy now for well over 2 centuries. With respect to Mosul, we are seeing the Iraqi forces, with the support of the coalition that includes the United States and Italy and other nations, moving forward and encircling Mosul. The intention is to drive ISIL out of what was its first major urban stronghold and what continues to be one of the key organizational and logistical and leadership hubs for ISIL. I am confident that we can succeed, although it's going to be a tough fight and a difficult fight. It is Iraqis who are doing the fighting, and they are performing effectively and bravely and taking on significant casualties. There will be ups and downs in this process, but my expectation is that ultimately it will be successful. And this will be, I think, a key milestone in what I committed to doing when ISIL first emerged, which was we were going to roll them back, and we are going to ultimately drive them out of population centers, and we will destroy them and defeat them so that they are not in a position to carry out terrorist attacks against our peoples or our friends and allies, or against innocent people inside of Iraq and Syria. And we've seen just steady progress on this front. Now, you ask a very important question, which is, if in fact we are successful, how do we deal with what could be a humanitarian crisis? Because ISIL, when it occupies these territories, it bleeds them dry. It feeds off them. It oppresses the local populations. It's not very good at governance. And so just basic functions like electricity or water start running down. People are fleeing from their homes. There will be significant displacement. This has all been part of the coalition planning process in conjunction with the United Nations, in conjunction with major aid organizations. And so we have put together plans and infrastructure for dealing with a potential humanitarian crisis that are as extensive as the military plans. That doesn't mean that we don't have to pay attention to it, and executing will be difficult. It's going to still be a tough environment to operate under, and no doubt there will be instances where we see some heartbreaking situations if in fact large numbers of people flee. It's hard when you leave your home. It's hard when you leave your home and you already didn't have a lot because you were living under an oppressive, barbarous regime. It's hard to leave your home in a war zone. So it's not something that I expect will be easy, but I think it perhaps hasn't been publicized enough, at least in the American press, the degree of planning and assets and resources that we're devoting to this very important problem. Because if we aren't successful in helping ordinary people as they're fleeing from ISIL, then that makes us vulnerable to seeing ISIL return and feeding on the resentments in the aftermath of Mosul being liberated. And so there's a strategic as well as humanitarian interest in us getting that right. Okay.
I think about Mosul, the considerations of the president are very clear. For Italian side, We are particularly committed about dam. There is a dam, a dangerous dam, and we support an Italian company who work to restore the dam because it could be a great problem for the population. And for the rest, we are totally engaged with the rest of coalition to ensure to the Iraqi people the possibility to have a future. And let me be very great to the Italian army, particularly Italian Carabinieri, who provide in this country to learning the local police. So we are not worried for the future if we will bring Mosul, because we think soon or later we will destroy Daesh. And the reconstruction and the rebuilding will be a priority for every member of the international community. Italy is engaged and work with the United States and the other allies. Last, prego, l'ultima. Last, okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. In italiano, anzi in inglese. The Mediterranean represents a geopolitical priority for Italy, mainly because of the constant flow of migrants. And is there a common strategies on this and a common strategies on Libya? And can Italy act as a bridge between Europe and Africa? And how American administration can help the efforts of the Italian government, because Europe sometimes leave alone Italy to face the challenge. Thank you.
Per il TG1 rispondo io.